this idea that particles, instead of looking at fields of electromagnetism, that particles themselves, there could be force between them. And when they get very close together, they could actually attract and come together in ways that was not something that would have been predicted from Maxwell and Faraday, right? Mm-hmm. This feature of coherency of particles is now part of superconductivity. It's part of the idea of coherent matter, which is part of cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction research, Leonard. But just like you're saying, and I've been studying this for about 2 weeks now because it's so fascinating, the Weber-Gauss idea of electromagnetism. The reason I'm saying this is there are alternatives to Maxwellian Faraday electromagnetism. That is based on 90-degree angles, pointing vectors of electromagnetic fields, which are 90 degrees orthogonal apart, always, right? Magnetic, electric, magnetic, electric. The Soviet researchers, later Russians, as I wrote about in Dark Matter Monsters, Zverblis and Nevesky, came up with a fractal electromagnetic idea where it's rings within rings within rings, what they called fractal electromagnetics. Not Maxwellian, which is 90 degrees, but inner rings of electricity and magnetism getting smaller. Each ring has more magnetism around it, and each of those rings has more electricity, and they kind of alternate in the Maxwellian way, but they do it inwardly condensed, and they form a fractal, and they described it as being a Koch snowflake fractal, which is, more edges and more edges on triangles. Something I studied in my dissertation, the Koch snowflake fractal. It's a very famous fractal. So they were proposing an alternative electromagnetic arrangement. Why? Because this guy, Zverblis, saw a classified Soviet experiment of ball lightning in a lab. Once you turned off the experiment and took the equipment away, the orb stayed on the tabletop for 2 days, he said.
Really?
Yes, he called it an electromagnetic phantom. He first thought it was a hoax, but he started investigating. It was part of some classified Soviet energy experiment. And he didn't believe at first. He thought there had to be some trick when they pulled the plug out and took the machine off, and the orb was still there. And he consulted Nevesky, a mathematician. And they realized if you had these sort of fractal electromagnetic patterns, instead of 90 degrees going outward, fractal going inward all the way down to the 0 point vacuum field, the quantum field, it would create this kind of loop of energy that kind of condensed in on itself and could last for a couple days. And so people have seen this and proposed alternative ideas, and then to find out that Wilhelm Weber, you can do some research, and there's a guy from Brazil who Assis, who translated a lot of his books and realized this too. There's another way to look at electromagnetic phenomena that allows for persistent luminous phenomena, orbs, and so forth. So, and the idea that when particles get very close together, they don't repel like we were taught, Coulomb's law. They actually attract and create, this is great, negative inertial mass. Yeah. Once you get negative inertial mass, you get warp drives, wormholes, cascading runaway energy effects that kind of like Tesla was experimenting with, where it creates a runaway energetic effect that keeps increasing. And they've described it in weird ways. It's known as the Casimir effect at the subatomic level. When you put particles very close together, it gets this massive attraction. But if it existed at a macroscopic level of our reality, it would be seen as something like ball lightning and things like where the particles get so close together that they become like identical in frequency and temperature and so forth, which is the basis for cold fusion Leonard ball lightning, which is, by the way, this is what Matsumoto said here, is that micro ball lightning and cold fusion are the same thing. It creates nuclear alchemy. The picture on the cover here is carbon that came out of a pure iron sphere. Carbon just from one of these microball lightning experiments, iron generating carbon. It shouldn't be possible. Considered, alchemy. This is, by the way, what Newton believed in. Newton was interested in the occult because he knew about these force laws. So here's the weird thing about it is once you have these force laws of Newton, this is the second law of force equals mass times acceleration. if you really push it, you get odd exotic states of matter. And what do we see around UFOs and ghosts and Sasquatch and ball lightning is these weird effects which are consistent with negative inertial mass. Once you have negative inertial mass, you get these really odd runaway effects that are more consistent with perpetual energy, something we wouldn't have thought is possible. But again, it's not an ordinary state of matter. And we all know about superconductivity, where you get these Cooper pairs, right? You get these electrons pairing up together, and it creates zero resistance, and you can create superconducting circuits. Well, the big lesson from all this is it can happen at room temperature, not just the Bose-Einstein condensate at absolute zero, where you get the coherency effects and so forth. These sorts of states of matter can exist in room temperature too. And the proof we have of that is simply the Lockheed Martin patent from 2016, when they talk about patenting coherent matter wave beams. And they say right in the beginning, because I've read this patent a couple of times, it's fascinating. They talk about all these cool cloaking effects and invisibility and action at a distance and directed energy. And it's not done with force, it's done with coherent frequency, right? Think of like a toning bowl or something. Coherent frequencies. They say right on page 1 that you don't need absolute zero to do this. You can do this, create these coherent effects with different types of particles, not just very, cooled down atoms of one or two types of elements. You could do with anything with the right frequency. And just to sum it up, I mean, there's a name for this called the Aharonov-Bohm effect. It already exists in physics since the 50s, of creating kind of coherency. So the point of all this is that the physics is already there to show us that these, what we call paranormal, these sort of exotic states of matter. I mean, science already knows about this. That's the point. It's just different than the textbook types of science that we were taught. It's just there's non-ordinary electromagnetic fields, there's fractal arrangements, there's types of fields that contain themselves within a very small space, but it doesn't radiate past a certain distance from that cluster of particles or something. So people have been researching this, why it just ended up in the classified realm. It shouldn't be there, only because this explains to me, and not, you don't have to agree with me on this, but it explains a lot of what we see around Sasquatch UFOs. You get these sort of time slips and strange effects on cameras and batteries, and just the oddities around these sorts of encounters that seem to me consistent with this type of matter.
I'm glad that you brought it full circle, because that's exactly where I was kind of go towards with it, is that I think that it's hidden from the public, because assumably this would create an infinite energy source, because it's almost like stealing energy from everything that's around it. So that's assumably why it wants to be covered up, is because obviously they want to be able to make money off of people needing energy, so they don't want to have a free energy source. But particularly with like UFOs and things, the reason why they don't necessarily need an energy source, so to speak, is because they pull energy from every single thing around it, and in turn end up distorting things. And you hear about all these constant interactions with UFOs flying close to the sun and that looking like it's pulling something off of it.
Yeah.
I wonder if that kind of explains that.
Yeah.
Is that the intention is that they need a massive power source in order to be able to possibly like jump dimensions, or
I think
be able to jump through a wormhole. So they just fly close to the biggest energy source, suck all the electrons and particles from it, and then boom, they have a massive energy source.
That would be one of the symptoms of negative mass, negative inertial mass. It pulls. As it moves away, it pulls stuff with it. It's the opposite of things pushing each other away. It sort of creates an attraction, and it would pull energy in. I mean, I was just reading this today. It was a NASA paper about negative inertial mass, and they said if it would exist at our macroscopic scale, not just the Casimir effect, this sort of quantum effect, but at our scale, it would do all these sorts of things that you're mentioning, including creating runaway energy effects and things sort of attracting each other. Actually, what you just said, this NASA article said the same thing. It would seemingly create energy out of nowhere.
from stealing from everything else around
Yeah,
it in
yeah.
turn.
Yeah.
So, I mean, assumably, this could probably be a damaging effect if you didn't have the ability to possibly stop it when you
Right.
needed to stop it.
Right. It can create runaway effects, and all of this technology you have to use with caution. Any of this cold fusion technology, Leonard, I mean, people have gotten cancer from being around these reactors because they do emit alternative types of radiation that we're not used to being around, and it creates this, exactly what you're saying, it can create a runaway effect. And I just learned just the past couple of days that Fleischmann and Pons, the researchers at University of Utah that were studying cold fusion, apparently they had an effect like this, a singularity effect, that they had a whole tub of water and the whole thing like burnt through the table into the ground or something. I mean, there was nothing burning. The reaction took over and it went through physical objects and just disappeared. This is what people see, by the way. I'm not kidding. People have seen metal objects and things literally disappear in these cold fusion experiments. I've seen it done with tungsten. Matsumoto talked about this. I mean, you get these weird little black holes and weird little effects that when you first look at it, you think it's just burning, but it's a quantum effect. It's not a chemical effect. This isn't from things physically getting hot. This is literally, as he described it, little supernovas and black holes. Basically, to sum it up, what we see at the cosmological scale, you can get at the microscopic scale too. He called it electronuclear collapse. What you get in black holes is kind of gravitational collapse you can get for electromagnetic reasons. By the way, this is what Wilhelm Weber said in 1846. And
so it's a matter of, I was going to bring it to it too and say everything is just condensing down on each other.
Yeah.
So, I mean, nobody necessarily knows what's on the other side of a black hole. People want to say that it opens up into another reality, but more often than not, it kind of seems like it would be a collapse in on itself, or rather than going into another reality, so to speak, you'd, if anything, be going into like a micro reality because of everything collapsing inward on itself.
Right. And I think we have examples of that happening again with cryptid encounters. I'm taking the Matsumoto approach, just like he's saying ball lightning and cold fusion and black holes and electronuclear collapse in ball lightning. It's the same thing. I'm saying what we see around these cryptids is the same sort of electronuclear collapse. And the evidence for that would be the cameras and batteries and cars stalling and stuff. When you've heard these cases, people see a dog man or something on the road, comes out of the ditch, and the car stalls just when they want to get away. So this to me is evidence of that. Now, again, if I'm wrong, I'm fine. I'm happy to be proven wrong or shown wrong. But this to me, you can simplify things in the same way, is that we're dealing with these alternative states of matter. And just like it happens out there in the cosmos on a grand scale, I think empirically you see this happening at a close. I've seen it myself in crop circles with the cameras and batteries repeatedly failing. I've talked to other people. I know someone in the UK, Steve Wills, and we were just discussing this on Facebook a couple of days ago, but he gave me this photo. It was a camera crew that was working with him in a crop circle. Every time they came into the circle, the boom mic wouldn't work at the edge of the circle. They'd walk out, it was fine, test it. Come back in, it wouldn't work. He gave me this photo of them looking really puzzled over these mics. But I think that's the same sort of electromagnetic effect. I mean, it's this fractal electromagnetic effect that just wreaks havoc on electronics.
I mean, would it theoretically be possible that there could be a negative of the negative effect, where when you hear about like UFOs, Sasquatch, Dogman, any of these things, that everybody likes to think that they might exist in another like side parallel reality, but maybe it's not so much they're existing in a side parallel reality, but more so like a micro reality. And if they have the means or a method in order to like reverse that, they end up opening themselves back up to the macro reality. And that could be where the condensing of like the balls with Sasquatch comes in, is that they're condensing themselves back down into this micro reality.
Yes.
And we're looking in the wrong direction as far as extraterrestrials and UFOs go. We're looking at it as a bigger dimension, or a dimension existing parallel to us, or rather it's a dimension that's within our dimension, but with that continuous pattern of like the micro mirroring the macro and keep going down the scale from there.